I've got a feeling that I'm much more sceptical than the skeptics, because it's funny, skeptics doubt everything apart from neuroscience, it seems to me, and anyway, we can discuss that. And I speak as a neuroscientist. I want to quote a famous conversation between Tolstoy and Chekhov. Chekhov was talking about peasants to Tolstoy. Tolstoy was talking about peasants to Chekhov and talking about their virtues, and Chekhov says, for God's sake, don't tell me about peasant virtues. Basically, I've lived amongst peasants all my life, and basically I feel the same about neuroscience. All my research has been in epilepsy, stroke, and so on and so forth, so I know all about its limitations, not merely its empirical limitations, but its metaphysical limitations. So if you think that neuroscience can give us any handle on metaphysics, then think again. And if I manage to persuade you of that in the next few minutes, then I feel my day's evening's work is not wasted. But our question was consciousness beyond the individual. That's what Tom suggested. And I want to argue that human consciousness, unlike the sentience of beasts, is always beyond the individual. And this is true at quite a basic level. And it reminds us that the mind, by the way, is not the activity of the brain. Consider my perception of this object, a glass. My awareness of it is of something that is other than me. In other words, my perception is relational. And this is reflected in the two-way connection between myself and the glass. First of all, there is a causal connection between the light originating from the glass and my awareness of the glass. Light passes into my eye and triggers off neural activity that eventually reaches what's called the visual cortex at the back of my head. This is a necessary condition of my seeing the glass. The question is that a sufficient condition? Well, if you remove the glass, or if you prevent the light originating from the glass reaching my eyes, if you cover my eyes or damage my visual pathways, I won't see the glass. But this causal connection is not the whole story. For activity in the visual cortex, like activity everywhere else in the nervous system, is mere physical events, like activity in the spinal cord, the cerebellum, etc., etc. Now, such events, physical events, don't have a aboutness that characterizes conscious events, including perceptions. This aboutness is what philosophers call intentionality. It is, as it were, reaching out from our bodies to the world around us. In short, to repeat, conscious experience is relational. Indeed, it is out of the body. And this is highlighted when we remember that when we're aware of an object, we're aware of something that is more than our awareness of it. We're aware of something that has intrinsic properties that are not exhausted by our experiences of it. We're aware of something that can be seen from many different angles, many different lights, many different distances than the one from which we're currently seeing it. And we're aware that it is something that can be seen by other conscious beings. In other words, we perceive the world around us as being populated by, and indeed made up of, items that are accessible to others, that belong to a field that others also occupy. And this should help us to understand why it is mistaken to think that brain science can give us the full story, even of absolutely basic consciousness, like my awareness of this glass. The activity inside the brain, in the solitary darkness of the skull, is of course a necessary condition of perception. If you chop my head off, my life becomes much less interesting. But it is not a sufficient condition. There are many other reasons for asserting this. For example, there's nothing in neural activity to underpin the explicit sense of past or future, and we can talk about Einstein and physics in a second. The first-person perspective that has already been referred to, or the unity of the conscious moment, or of the self over time, or self-consciousness. Now, these are obviously very large issues, and I can't cover them in the minutes left to me, but I want to turn my attention to another aspect of consciousness beyond the individual. Our consciousness is not just a succession or a torrent of experiences. It is a more or less coherent network of narratives located in the framework of a shared world. The sense we make of things individually, notwithstanding our particular take, our singular history, our unique trajectory, the sense we make of things individually draws on a sea of meanings which are shared. The most obvious manifestation of these shared meanings is the sea of signs, the so-called semiosphere in which we live. And this is constructed out of artifacts, rituals, institutions, and of course, above all, language. Although I have to say language is something of a parvenu and a superficial manifestation of things that are much more deep. Our lives are our individual participations in, contributions to, and drawings upon a community of minds. A community, by the way, that has developed and elaborated over hundreds of thousands of years and involves tens of millions, indeed billions of individuals. So insofar as our passage from one moment to the next is beyond the blooming, buzzy confusion of infancy, as William James so unhappily put it, and is intelligible, our consciousness goes beyond our individuality. And this is evident most poignantly when we assert our independence from others and we pretend we're utterly unique. Not only independent points of departure. In the process of making sense of ourselves, we always have to draw on the language of the collective. The self to which we address our self-descriptions has its origin and its destination in our relations with others. So one can think of consciousness as inescapably being beyond the individual, and certainly beyond the activity confined to a particular cranium, like this boss here, without subscribing to notions, and I don't subscribe to them, that we are generic ghosts that somehow get tangled up in the singular machines of our bodies, or that there are fields of consciousness floating between people's heads, or more radically still, that consciousness pervades the entire universe. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a profound skeptic, and not only do I not accept the skeptical interpretation of a lot of the phenomena, but I don't accept the reasons which that skeptical interpretation has been put forward, namely that these phenomena are products of brain activity.